So today we're going to talk a little bit about the basics of a trust. I know I recommend those at times, but some of you are a little confused about some of the things around a trust. I am not an estate attorney. I work with a lot of things, but I'm just going to try to open your mind to some of the things to create your estate plans. And of course, I'm Amy Rose Herrick, and I am a profit building specialist, and I help build your wealth, but then we also want to protect it and take it into the next generations. So let's talk about first, 5 little things. These 5 things really are the 5 elements of a valid trust. And of course, if you're going to go to this kind of effort, you certainly want it to be a valid trust. So the first one is that the person, the settlor or the grantor, has to have the capacity to set up the trust. So we're looking at someone, which can be a loose term for some of you. You need to be of sound mind. You have the capabilities to understand that you're putting this trust in place and the capacity to do that. Now, the second thing is the grantor or the settlor has to have the intent to create the trust. But understand the intent to create the trust is not the same as the execution of the trust. I could have an intent to put 12 trusts in place, but if I never finish the paperwork and I don't have it executed, I don't have it signed, notarized, go through all of the steps, initial the pages, whatever, then I have not properly created the trust. So you must have an intent, because you'll have a purpose for the trust, but you also need to do the execution of it. Now, the other thing, we come down to a beneficiary. Now, a trust could have as little as 1 beneficiary, or it could have a multitude of beneficiaries with different percentages. That's really up to the grantor to make that decision on how many beneficiaries that they will be. You could also have a primary beneficiary or beneficiaries. You could have a contingent beneficiary or beneficiaries. You could also have a second contingent or a third contingent. So if you really were concerned, you could put layers so that the estate would never fall into a situation where they are hunting for one of those odd relatives that you hear about every once in a blue moon. Now, there also must be duties for the trustee to perform that are very clear, and they are spelled out as a part of the trust documents. And then the 5th item has to be the sole trustee and a sole beneficiary cannot be the same person. So if you only had 1 child, for example, you would not be able to name the child as the trustee and the beneficiary. You can't do that. It could be self-serving. That's one of the things that you need to have 2 different ones for that. But if you have multiple beneficiaries, it becomes a non-issue at that point. Now, the other thing that we should spend a minute talking about is you have to fund the trust or it fails. I mean, it's a pass or fail. So when I say you must fund the trust, in the trust documents, you may set up things that you're going to include a house, you're going to include bank accounts, you're going to include these 5 rental properties, whatever the case is for you, your painting collection, whatever. But if you don't change the titling of the assets to the trust, then you have failed to fund the trust. It's empty. There's nothing in it. So you don't want to go through all of the effort of putting the trust together and fail to fund the trust, whether it's with cash, investments, property, whatever the case may be. You cannot have an empty trust, with what I will call one exception that comes to mind quickly. Have you ever heard of a testamentary trust? Now, a testamentary trust is funded at your death via will. Now, these are usually only used when you have minor age children or you have disabled family members that you want to leave assets to, but they are not capable of receiving them, whether it is due to age and they're not an adult, or they don't have the mental capacity to manage the funds. So that's at times when a testamentary trust is used. But again, it's an exception that will be funded at the time of the estate distribution based on the will. So it will be empty until it is triggered at death. But again, you have all of the same things that are going to come into line there that need to make it a valid trust. And of course, the attorney that you're going to work with will help you on whether that is the best choice for you or not, because there are other ways that we can do that. You need to understand when you're working with a trust, the term revocable and irrevocable. They act very, very differently. If I have a revocable trust, and most of you are familiar with the term revocable living trust, while the person is living, we see that a lot. Now, with a revocable trust, I can change my mind. I can change my mind about anything, about what I put in the trust, what I take out of the trust. I can change the beneficiaries. I can do a ton of things. You know what? I can decide I don't even like this trust. I can dissolve the trust and I can open up a new one. I have unlimited choices on a revocable trust on what I want to do. So think about, gives me the most flexibility that you could want. Then there's the other kind. It's called an irrevocable trust. Those first two letters, the IR in front of revocable, huge, huge difference. It means I cannot change my mind. Sometimes there are minor things I might be able to change, but overall, no. Once I have put the property into an irrevocable trust, whatever it is not my property anymore, and I can't just take it back. Will not work. So it's very important when you're setting up the trusts that you understand the difference between revocable and irrevocable to do what your intent would be. And it's not uncommon for me to see individuals that have both a revocable and an irrevocable trust because they are doing different things. Let me give you an example. There was an individual who had a rather large apartment type complex that was worth a substantial amount of money. They did not want the children to sell that for at least 10 years because of what they were projecting on a long-term value. They placed it in an irrevocable trust, so even they couldn't sell it at that point and take any of the proceeds, with the stipulation that that property could not be sold any sooner than 10 years unless there was an eminent domain. Very, very clear. So they made an irrevocable decision to let go of the property, and they also were very specific on what they would allow the family to do and what they would not allow them to do. It's probably a good time to talk about, well, what is a beneficiary? Well, who do you want to be a beneficiary? That's going to be a question that we'll cover in a minute. But the other thing that I usually recommend with beneficiaries is that you want to go probably 3 deep. And when I say 3 deep, I like to see trustees, executors, beneficiaries. In the worst case scenario, or when this money's being passed out, who do I want to be first in line? What percentage do I want them to have? What if we were all on an airplane, it crashed, we all died? Who's the second group of people that I would want to have the money? It was a really horrible plane crash. We were all on it, and all of those people are gone too. Who is my third line that I want to have it? You know, as a last resort, some individuals, you know, they will put charities that they expect to be around forever, but never leave it in the position where a court, based on the law of the land, is going to determine who your eventual beneficiaries are, when it's so easy to be able to put that in print. And again, remember the words revocable and irrevocable when you're setting those beneficiaries up. Now, that's a really good time for us to talk about 2 other terms. Are you familiar with per capita or per stirpes? Because this is language that's going to be included in the trust document, and you need to understand what you're reading. And if there's a term you don't understand, you make sure you understand it, and it's what you want before you ever sign your name to that. And I do have other videos that talk about titling of assets and beneficiaries that you may want to watch too, but we'll spend a quick minute on per capita. Per capita, let's pretend. See my little 4 fingers? I have 4 children, and it says per capita. I've passed away. I have 4 beneficiaries. Now, per capita means as long as you're living, you'll be able to receive those assets. But what happens if one of these children predeceased me, or they died in the plane crash with me? There we go. So we have 3 left. Per capita means that each one of these individuals is still going to get their normal share, but the share of the person who passed away, because it said per capita, that is going to be divided equally between the living beneficiaries. So behind each person's name, I put per capita. So it is very person specific on how I want to handle that. Now, if I go back to the same 4 children, same scenario where I have one child who has passed away, but I put per stirpes. Now, per stirpes means that each one of the living beneficiary is going to get their share. That is not going to change. But the person who has passed away just happens to have 2 of my beautiful grandchildren. Their share will go to their heirs as per stirpes. So very different outcome on what I put behind the name. Now, I want you to understand that if I go back to these 4 children, for example, it could also be a charity, it could be a neighbor, other relative, whoever you wanted. When you put that behind there, I do not have to treat every beneficiary the same. I could have per capita, per stirpes, per capita. That's really up to me. So those are some very important terms for you to enable your settlement and your trust to be exactly what you intended. And some of you should go pull out your documents because maybe you've used per capita when you really wanted per stirpes, and you need to go back and revisit that issues. This question always comes up. Well, what should I not put in a trust? Well, the very first thing that comes to my mind is your retirement accounts. Absolutely no on your deferred taxation retirement accounts. Well, what's that? That is going to be your IRAs, your 401k, SEP, IRA, your simple IRA, your individual 401k, 457, 403. There's so many different ones that are out there, a defined benefit plan, any of those things. I do not feel that the trust is a good recipient for those funds. And let me tell you why. If you were to put those funds into the trust because they were deferred taxation, whoever is the recipient pays the tax. And if you have several $100,000 into these accounts, your federal income tax based on trust tax rates can be as much as 40% or more. And oh, by the way, do you have any state income taxes? Well, those could be due too. So we could very quickly lose a huge amount of those assets in naming the trust as the beneficiary and create an enormous tax bill that has to be paid and decreases the amount that goes to heirs. There are tax favored ways for heirs to be able to liquidate those accounts, and they don't have to do it all at once. So I don't feel that deferred taxation assets really belong into a trust as a beneficiary. It's not the most efficient way to preserve the assets. Some of you are going to have Roth IRA accounts, or you're going to have a 401k Roth. Now, those are tax-free assets. If you paid them into the estate, no, we're not creating a into the trust. Right word here, the trust. You are not going to create a tax bill, but what you have done is you have ruined the ability for the recipients of those funds to continue to allow them to increase over time on a tax-free status. You have taken that option away from them. So I really prefer to leave those assets alone. I don't feel that they are a good option to go into a trust for the beneficiary. Even though there's no tax liability, you're taking that tax-free time to compound away from your beneficiaries. Not a good move. Now, there is another one that we come into play. How many of you have a Archer or health savings account, HSA? Many of you have that on the high deductible plans. You don't want that to go into the trust either, because again, those assets are held on a tax-free status as long as they are spent for medical bills. Depending upon the value that's in some of these HSAs, you may have some of the assets in cash. Some of you have them invested in a mutual fund and other options for growth because you didn't really need the money. Those can be passed to a beneficiary and they retain that tax-free status and the tax-free growth as long as they're used to medical expenses. So we wouldn't want to put those into the trust, and what part of my thoughts. Here's another no-no. What about assets that are held in another country? I really think you need to seek legal counsel out in each one of those. Estate distribution could be different. What's going to be the most efficient and cost-effective process for your heirs to get it? So foreign assets, generally, you are not going to want to put those into the trust. They may need to have their own trust or similar type of documents in the country where they are located. Here's one that I got asked that I thought was really pretty funny. Well, can I just put cash in the trust? And I said, well, if you had, a checking account, a money market, savings, something like that. No. I meant like, I have a safety deposit box that has a whole bunch of cash in it. Well, can I just put that in there? Well, yes and no. If you have a whole lot of cash sitting in a safety deposit box, somebody is going to have to get it out of the safety deposit box. And then let's pretend that it's $150,000. It's a number. And you go and take it from the bank vault, or well, the trustee would, the bank vault, assuming they got access to it, and they take it over to the counter and they fill out a deposit slip. It's going to trigger a report because anything over $10,000 that is a cash transaction will be reported. And then the question becomes, well, where did this money come from? So I'm going to tell you that on a practical basis, I usually don't see that cash setting in a safety deposit box is usually going to be a very easy or good thing to put into a trust at that point. But, talk to your attorney, talk to your banker, but just be aware of those types of things. We talked already. Remember, in all of these steps, we got to think about whether I'm better off in a revocable trust or in an irrevocable trust. And of course, this brings me up to the next one. Well, Amy, so there's only two kinds, a revocable and an irrevocable. And no, that's not true. It's just two different models, because underneath the models, then we get to talk about what you may think of as the features, because they do different things within the trusts. We're going to look at one, a charitable remainder trust. A charitable remainder trust allows you to take some current income tax deductions for the items that are placed in the trust. You can pull off a lifetime income, and then at your death or a period of years, whichever you choose, the remaining assets in the trust go to the charity that you have named. So it's a very unique dynamic there. You could have a special needs trust. When you talk about an individual who is incapacitated, regardless of age, it could be a minor age child who has autism. It could be an elderly parent who has dementia. It could have been my brother who was in a car accident and had a closed head injury, and well, he's not able to handle his affairs going forward. So with a special needs trust, those are usually set up and funded so that that individual is able to have their needs met, but they don't have direct access to the funds. Let's pretend that my brother that had a terrible car accident, he has a closed head injury, but he is receiving several programs under public assistance. If he was to inherit $500,000, all of that could go away until he spent that $500,000, and then he would have to requalify, and we hope some of those programs and things still exist. On a special needs trust, it would not affect any of his resources that he currently has because he doesn't own the money. But if he needed something such as a new wheelchair and there wasn't enough or there wasn't a program to pay for it, then the special needs trust could purchase that and give that to that particular person for their support. So for some of you, a special needs trust is really going to be your best option. There are some other trusts I'm not going to spend a lot of time in. They're an asset protection trust. That is often used by a lot of professionals that have a higher net worth. Again, these are conversations you have with your financial advisors, with your attorneys, and those type of things. What about an AB trust? Well, that's usually triggered when it comes down to settling an estate and a will, depending upon how the documents are set. You can have a blind trust. You'll often hear that with the politicians. So theoretically, they have no idea what the investments are and what's happening in the trust because they have someone else doing it, and they are supposed to be blind to everything that is happening in it. You can have an insurance trust. On the insurance trust let's say it's a revocable life insurance trust. The trust actually applies for the insurance as the owner. You have someone who is the insured, which is a live person. And then you have the beneficiary, which is usually the life insurance trust. And then the trust would dictate what would happen with those proceeds that you have. You can have a spendthrift trust. What if we have a relative that we know that if they received any money at all, they would be broke within 24 hours and they'd also owe additional money. They cannot handle money for whatever reason. Or they have a disability and you don't want them to have too much. Well, a spendthrift trust, you could be very specific on the parameters of what the trust could pay for or what set amount they could receive each month, each quarter, or each year. So there's a purpose for that for individuals who really cannot handle money well for whatever reason. There's Q-tip trusts. There's credit shelter trust. There's all different kinds of trusts that can do a variety of things. And you do not have to try to make one trust do everything. You may only need one trust. You may need multiple trusts in order to accomplish whatever it is that was your heart's desire. So I hope one of the things that you're seeing here is that with some careful estate planning, and I call it a wish list. I want you to take out a piece of paper, type it on your phone, do it on your computer, whatever, wherever you can make notes, and think about an asset, whatever that asset is. At my death, I wish. What do you wish would happen with it? Go to the next one. At my death, I wish, or I need this too. And that's where you can start building the framework to be able to talk with the professionals who can help guide you on what tool, whether it is a trust or account titling, whatever the situation may be, to guide you so that we can satisfy what your wish list is in the most cost-effective, tax-effective, efficient distribution way possible, so that we don't waste money and we don't waste time settling estates when we pass away and making it a nightmare instead of a very easy, efficient transition. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd really appreciate it if you'd click the like button or leave a few comments on it. Of course, you are welcome to subscribe and follow us so that you don't miss a video. I am always open to new topics, so by all means, please feel free to send us a note, reach out to us for topics that we'll be putting out in the future. Do check out the library. I think you'll find a lot of good information there that is available to you so that I can help you build your assets and then also preserve it going forward. Again, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe, and I'm going to see you on another day. Thank you so much for being here with me. Talk to you soon.